Who doesn't like a good bag of potato chips? Whether it's the saltiness or the crispness, I think we all know they taste good. But just like any other object, or any other thing in life, they can be associated with something scary happening. Here are 3 stories involving bags of potato chips, but not in a good way. Story 1. This happened a few years ago now, and part of what makes this so creepy is how unexpectedly it happened. I'll skip over a lot of details that really don't matter. I was a 30-year-old guy and going back to college. The immediate context is that I had just finished my classes for the day and stopped by a sandwich shop before heading home to start my homework. When I walked in, the place was deserted. I rang the bell and about 30 seconds later, one of the employees came around the corner. Soon enough, I had my sandwich, cookie, and drink in hand and was picking out a table. Though I could have had literally any table, I saw that someone had left a bag of Lay's potato chips on one of them. The surface of that table, as well as the benches, were clean, so the bag was the only thing on it. Now, I'm not one to just randomly eat public food, but I inspected the bag and it was still sealed. I briefly thought about returning it to the counter, but figured someone must have already paid for it and forgotten it, so I sat down. No sooner had I started eating my sandwich than I heard a door open somewhere behind me. This particular restaurant had a narrow hallway leading off from the main dining area, which led to the bathrooms. Up walked a slightly overweight bald guy who appeared to be in his 50s. He was wearing a faded collared t-shirt, jorts, and tennis shoes. I expected him to keep walking, like, out of the door, but instead he just stopped by my table. It was very awkward, and I was quickly becoming annoyed. He was just standing there, looking down at me. Right as I was about to ask him what he wanted, the man said very matter-of-factly, "I think you have my chips." He then pointed at the bag of Lay's. Luckily, I hadn't opened it, so I picked it up and handed it to the man, saying, "Sorry, I didn't know this was yours." Surprisingly, the man shook his head and said that it was fine, he didn't really want them. What happened next was both shocking and creepy. The man asked if he could have a seat, but as he did so, he went ahead and sat down anyway. I was now at a complete loss for what to do. The man reached over my sandwich as he stuck out his hand and introduced himself as Peter. Maybe because it was so unexpected, I returned his handshake, but I was quickly becoming upset. As if things couldn't get more awkward, after taking his hand back, Peter just sat there, looking at me. I didn't know what this man wanted. What seemed like 5 minutes passed, and finally I asked Peter if I could help him with anything. Peter told me his car wouldn't start, and asked if I had jumper cables. I actually did have jumper cables, and under any other circumstances would have been happy to help, but this situation was way too far off. First the chips and now this? I apologized and told him I didn't. I then expected him to leave, but he didn't. He just kept sitting there, and I had to break the silence again. I asked him if he needed anything else, and suggested he look for someone else who might have jumper cables. Unfortunately, there wasn't anyone else in the restaurant with us, as even the employees had gone back away from the counter. Peter joked that I was wanting him to leave, and stood up and slowly walked away. Finally. It was only now that I could eat my sandwich in peace. I watched him as he walked out of the doors, and stopped in front of the store momentarily before walking along the sidewalk area and out of view. Now I was alone in the seating area, and contemplated what just happened. I decided to take more time eating my sandwich, hoping that would increase the chances that Peter, or whatever his name was, would be gone by the time I got out. After I finished eating, I threw my trash away and walked cautiously to the door. I didn't eat the chips on the off chance Peter had done something to them. To my relief, when I walked outside I didn't see him. However, that was short-lived, as when I was almost to my truck, Peter came in from my peripheral vision, walking quickly over to me. I didn't care anymore. I quickly opened and closed my door, threw it in reverse, and backed out of the parking spot. Peter stopped like 10 feet away, and as I pulled away, I could see him watching me. As I drove home, I thought about how maybe I should have confronted him. Like, maybe there was some chance he had been planning to follow me, and me confronting him could have prevented that. I honestly didn't expect that to be the case, but my stomach started to sink when I noticed a red car seemed to follow me. There wasn't much traffic at this time of the day where I was going, so it definitely stuck out. I didn't go home, but rather pulled into another shopping center and parked. To my dismay, the red car parked too. I was waiting for Peter to get out, but he didn't. I waited for what seemed like 5 minutes, but no one got out. Finally, I started to drive away, but the red car started driving too. I had had enough. I parked my truck again and got out. I walked towards the red car with my arms up in a "what the hell do you want" gesture. After I did so, the car actually sped away. I then got back in my truck and drove in the opposite direction. I didn't go straight home, but instead circled a few other blocks in my neighborhood, trying to see if the red car followed me. It didn't appear to have done so. I then quickly pulled into my garage and shut it, not wanting my truck to be visible from the road. It was a little after 6 p.m. and getting dark at this point. I set up my laptop and notebook on the kitchen table and started to work on what I needed to. Periodically, I'd go to my front door and look through the peephole, but neither Peter nor the red car showed up. Several hours later, I was getting ready for bed. Just when I laid down and got out my phone to set my alarms for the next day, I thought I heard a car pull up and stop its engine. I honestly didn't expect it to be Peter, but given the circumstances, I had to check. One more time I checked the peephole, and my blood ran cold when I indeed saw that car. Like before, no one got out. My blood boiling, I grabbed the baseball bat and a large kitchen knife, opened my front door, and started walking aggressively towards the car. It sped away immediately, and unfortunately I couldn't get the license plate number. I called the cops anyway, and they came and I gave a statement, but there really wasn't anything they could do. We walked around the outside of my house, and they told me they'd patrol the area over the rest of the night. They also advised me to call 911 again if the car showed up. At this point I fully expected it to return sometime, but it never did. I even had a surveillance system installed, but it never captured anything suspicious happening. That's really the end of the story, but I can't help but wonder what Peter's intentions were, or why he used the bag of chips in the first place. I assume he was going to rob me and possibly break and enter my house, and maybe he thought using the bag of chips would be a good way to start a conversation and gain my trust. But how he went about it was just so awkward that I doubt he could have conned anyone. Anyway, I've since graduated, moved, and got married, so this is more a distant memory than anything else. Still, in the way back of my mind, I'll always have a fear that I'll run into Peter again. Story 2. This story happened when I was in high school, and it's both terrifying but also sad. I was a senior, and we were all about to graduate, so I was basically on autopilot for whatever remained of the semester. My experiences in high school were pretty average, I'd say, and I never really got picked on or picked on anyone else. There were a few weird kids at our school, as I'm sure there are at most schools. One of them was named Ryan. He was a junior, but though he'd gone to our high school for all 3 years, I knew next to nothing about him. Ryan almost never said anything, and I figured he definitely had some kind of issues, but whatever they were, I had no idea. Anyway, one day at lunch I saw Ryan walk over to the vending machines. He put in $2, pressed some buttons, and then just stood there. After a moment I got the attention of my friends sitting at our table, and we all looked at him. They thought it was funny, but I was more curious. What Ryan did next, though, surprised all of us. In complete contrast to his usual demeanor, Ryan started to violently push the vending machine and yell obscenities. The whole lunchroom fell silent, and Ryan continued. I'm not sure any of us knew what to do in this situation, including the teachers. After 10 seconds or so, our security guard, Officer Johnston, walked over to him, and in his usual fashion asked Ryan what was going on. Ryan stopped shaking the vending machine and yelling, and explained calmly that he didn't get his bag of potato chips because it was stuck. Normally Officer Johnston would be stricter, but he was also a kind man, and I think he knew that Ryan wasn't all there. He calmly extended his hand, saying it was okay, and Ryan walked towards him, apparently starting to cry. There was a fair amount of laughter in the lunchroom, but I genuinely felt bad. Officer Johnston and 2 of the teachers escorted Ryan outside, and I don't know what happened to him after that. I do know that Ryan didn't come to school for a few days. During those few days, people talked about it, but no one knew exactly why he snapped at that point. Cut to a week later. I think this was 2 weeks before school ended. It was 6th period English class, and the people in my class, myself included, were beyond trying to care. To be fair, we just completed our major project and had some downtime before the final. Our teacher, Mr. A, was also just letting us study, though we weren't really doing that. All of a sudden, we heard the PA system activate, and our principal got on and told us we were going into lockdown and that it was not a drill. A few of the girls in our class were pretty scared, and Mr. A seemed pretty worried as well. He made sure we were all accounted for as he walked to the door, locked it, and closed the blinds. A few minutes later, we heard banging coming from down the hallway, and I picked up on the fact that it sounded a lot like when Ryan was shaking the vending machine. Then it clicked, and I realized it probably was Ryan. I couldn't make out what he was saying initially, but his yelling got louder as I assumed he was moving towards us. Eventually he was right outside our door and started banging on it, yelling, "Shut up, stop laughing, I'll get every one of you." My blood ran cold, and several of the girls started crying. Ryan stopped momentarily, but soon we heard a loud thud as he was body slamming the door. Unfortunately, this was an older building, and only too late did we realize the door wouldn't hold. Just as Mr. A started to push his desk over to act as a barricade, did the lock break and the door swing open. Ryan was right on the other side, and for a moment he just stood there. I heard someone screaming behind me as we all realized he was carrying a large knife. I'll always remember how Mr. A spoke to Ryan in a calm voice, asking him to put the knife down so they could talk. I should mention that Mr. A was in like his 50s, and we were worried he wouldn't be able to fend off Ryan's attack. Ryan was rather overweight and didn't seem to move quickly, but given how violently he was shaking and banging things, he could probably have done some serious damage. Ryan just stood there in the doorway, yelling over and over again how we were all laughing at him and telling us to shut up, and how we were never his friends. Apparently what Mr. A was saying wasn't calming him down, because Ryan started to walk around the desk and towards him. Mr. A backed up a bit. I and probably several other guys were debating about whether to try to stop him, but I think we were all paralyzed by fear. Then, as if by a miracle, right when Ryan was about to get to Mr. A, someone from the hallway yelled for Ryan to drop the knife and put his hands up. Ryan turned around and dropped the knife. The person in the hallway then told Ryan to get on the floor, which he did as well. A moment later, a cop came into the room with his gun drawn, and another one came in after that. 10 seconds later, they had Ryan in cuffs, and then picked him up and led him out of the room. A few things followed that incident. The rest of the school day was canceled, and we all had to be picked up by our parents, many of whom were hysterical. We were also required to meet with our school counselor to discuss what happened. Ryan never came back to school, and I have no idea what happened to him after that. As time's gone on, I feel more and more bad for him. It came out later that he had been picked on all throughout high school, and with him not being all there, who knows how he experienced that. I think what happened to Ryan is a good reminder of what can happen when you bully people. You never truly know what mental state that person would be in, and when and how they might crack. As for me, I tend to always mind my own business, and I think things are much better that way. Story 3. I broke up with my long-term girlfriend a few months before this story happened, and I was severely depressed. I was working at a convenience store at the time, and barely scraping by, so I didn't have much going for me. In between shifts, I'd stay in my apartment just sleeping and eating, and when my alarm told me it was time to get ready, it was always a battle. I guess it got easier as time went on, but I was still down in the dumps when this happened, and I think it was my mental state that allowed this incident to happen. One of my friends decided to fix me up with one of his friends. It was my first date since my breakup, and my first date in almost 2 years. Her name was Angela, and we met on a Tuesday afternoon at a local coffee shop. I was extremely nervous, as I knew nothing about her, and I didn't have the best social skills. I arrived a few minutes early, but she was already there, sitting at a table. Angela saw me walk up and greeted me enthusiastically. I scrambled for something to say, and managed a rather awkward hello. Apparently that didn't put her off too much, because she stood up and threw her arms around me. I don't want to critique her looks too much, so I'll just say that she was attractive. She was also on the skinny side. When we sat back down, I tried to do the best I could with small talk. I noticed she talked rather quickly. At first I thought she might have been nervous too, but as the conversation went on, my impression changed. Maybe in hindsight that would have been a red flag, I don't really know. I think I was just too nervous to concentrate during the first part of our conversation. She told me she was a receptionist at an office nearby, and I told her I worked at a convenience store. I don't want to name these places in order to avoid sharing too much information, but really, it doesn't matter. Angela asked me about my hobbies, and I told her playing video games and reading. I asked her the same, and she told me she'd go out with her friends to local restaurants and shops. Overall, things were a bit cliche, but honestly, I was just happy that I was starting to get over my anxiety, and this was a relatively normal conversation so far. I wouldn't say there were sparks, but there was also no reason to cut the date short. After we finished our coffees, we decided to walk outside and go in some of the shops. We were in a big strip mall area, with different businesses on the perimeter of a large parking lot. Angela and I went into a bookstore, an arts and crafts store, 2 different clothing stores, and just walked around for a little while. To be honest, I wasn't too excited by that, and though I wasn't trying to be antisocial, I felt like this was probably a good place to have the date end. After we got out of the last store, I told Angela that I needed to go home and get ready for my next shift. That's when things started to get weirder. Angela showed a sudden burst of emotion and begged me not to go. She told me how she was having a great time and wished the date could go on forever. To be honest, I felt really bad, but that made me more sure that ending things here would be for the best. I apologized again and went in to give her a hug. Angela actually backed away and insisted that we eat dinner together. But it was only like 3 in the afternoon, and I wasn't even remotely hungry. I told her that I was sorry, but I needed to leave. Then she told me that she didn't have a ride. I thought that was strange, since I assumed that she drove here because we weren't near any houses or apartments. I guess she had a friend give her a ride. This honestly made me feel a little better, since I could end the date doing something nice for her. We walked back to my car, which was an old Chevy Camaro, and I opened the door for her. Luckily, my car was decently clean. I asked Angela where to, and she gave me an address. It was like 15 minutes away. As we pulled out of the parking lot, Angela told me about all the fun we had and asked when I'd be free. That made me feel sick, since I had to let her down easy but hated being dishonest. I made something up about how I'd have to work a lot of shifts back to back, so I wouldn't be free for at least a week or 2. Something told me that she caught on, because her demeanor started to change. What happened next was completely unexpected. Angela took out a bag of chips from her purse, which I guess she'd been carrying around the entire time, and asked me if I wanted any. I still wasn't hungry, and was honestly sketched out at this point, so I politely said no. Angela kept insisting and told me that it was okay, because the bag was sealed. I was completely sketched out at that point. We were about 10 minutes away from her apartment, and I contemplated my options. I decided to just take the bag of chips, and told her thank you and that I'd eat it later. Apparently Angela didn't like that either, and she told me that she wanted to see me enjoy the snack she had given me. That's when I examined the bag. It indeed looked closed, but it didn't look right somehow. Like it had previously been opened, but then maybe glued or taped closed discreetly. Angela was looking right at me, so I had to do or say something. Once again, I told her that I wasn't hungry and deliberately set the bag of chips down in the little compartment in my door. That made Angela visibly upset, and she started yelling. I froze, as this was completely unexpected. I also instinctively hit the brakes, and when we pulled to a stop, I told her firmly to get out of my car. Angela showed her true colors as she started trying to punch me. Luckily, I fended her off easily, and managed to take the keys out of the ignition, walk around to her side, and pull her out forcefully. I had to pull her out forcefully, as she was clinging to the inside of my car. I closed the door behind her, and before she could open it again, I locked it. I ran back to my side and shut my door, and not a moment too soon, because Angela came over there and started banging on my window. It was still surreal how quickly things escalated, but I didn't care, and I started speeding off. When I got back to my apartment complex, I parked in front of another building, so as to throw Angela off in case she followed me. I honestly didn't expect her to, but I just wanted to be sure. I walked upstairs to my apartment and just sat there, replaying what just happened. I had brought the bag of chips with me and took a closer look. Yep, I could definitely see some kind of glue holding the top of the bag together. I debated about whether or not to open the bag, but ultimately decided it would be best to keep it sealed and throw it away. So after half an hour or so, I walked back down to ground level, where there were trash cans, and I threw it away there. After that, I called my friend who had set me up with Angela. He told me that she was just an acquaintance he'd met a few times, while hanging out with some of our other friends at a local restaurant arcade establishment. When I told him what just happened, he didn't believe me, but I didn't want to go through the trouble of trying to convince him. I just ended the call and then started to lie down. I didn't really have a shift that night. Now, you probably think that's where the story ends, but no matter how much I wanted it to, it didn't. It's been 3 weeks since my date with Angela, and part of the reason I'm telling this story is because yesterday I found another bag of chips tucked in by one of the windshield wipers on my car. Like the first one, it seems like the top was glued shut. I still don't know what to do. I considered going to the police, but I'm not sure how much they could do. I don't even have Angela's phone number or last name. Whatever happens, this is the scariest thing that's happened in my life so far, and I just hope that no one else has to go through a similar experience.